Eleanor Hayes never thought her quiet acts of kindness would echo back. She fed a homeless boy named Leo behind the diner for 7 years until her jealous manager framed her and got her fired. Broke and forgotten, she left the boy one last bag of food with her address tucked inside, praying he'd survive. A decade of silence followed until one autumn evening, a black SUV rolled up to her worn-down house. When the man stepped out, she froze. The boy she once saved had returned, and what he revealed next would change everything. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease every morning. Old booths lined the walls, their red vinyl cracked from years of use, and the hum of conversation mixed with the clatter of plates. For most, it was just another place to grab a cheap breakfast before work. But for Eleanor Hayes, a 60-year-old waitress with silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun, the diner was her whole world. She moved with quiet precision, refilling cups, balancing trays, offering tired smiles even when her legs ached. Most customers barely noticed her, except when their orders were late. But Eleanor had a secret rhythm after every shift, one that none of the regulars knew. At the end of each day, she'd slip out the back door, clutching a small paper bag. Sometimes it was leftovers, sometimes something she had quietly bought with her own tips. She'd walk down the narrow alley, her shoes scraping the asphalt, until she reached the edge of the dumpster, where a boy always waited. He couldn't have been older than 8 when she first saw him. Dark brown skin, big eyes too heavy with hunger, clothes worn thin against the cold. He never asked. He never begged. He just stood there, shifting from one foot to the other, his arms crossed tight as if bracing against the world. The first time she hesitated, but when she handed him a sandwich wrapped in paper, he looked at her with something beyond gratitude. It was disbelief, as if kindness was stranger to him than hunger. And so it began. Day after day, year after year, Eleanor brought him food. She didn't press him with questions or demand to know his story. She just fed him, a slice of pie when there was extra, soup when it was cold, a carton of milk when she could afford it. Other workers started to notice. "You're wasting good food on some stray," one of the cooks whispered, shaking his head. Another server muttered, "You'll regret it." Kids like that never remember who helped them. Eleanor pretended not to hear, but she caught their words like small cuts, letting them sting before she buried them deep. Still, she kept feeding him. She started leaving napkins tucked with little notes, a smiley face, "Stay warm," sometimes just his name because she'd asked him once, gently, and he had whispered it so low she almost didn't hear, but she never repeated it aloud to anyone else. It was theirs. Through storms, she carried him bread in her coat pocket, shielding it from rain. On blistering summer evenings, she froze bottles of water, so he could have something cold. And when her hands trembled from arthritis, she still packed that paper bag and walked the alley as if the ritual was the one thing keeping her steady. By the 7th year, the boy, Leo, had grown taller, his frame filling out. But his eyes, they still carried the same weight. He would nod at her quietly, sometimes managing a half-smile. But words were rare. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was survival. And yet, in that silence, she saw him. Not as a homeless kid, not as another forgotten child, but as someone who mattered, even if no one else believed it. Eleanor never knew it then, but each bag of food was planting a seed. And while others walked past that boy every single day without glancing twice, she stopped. She noticed. She cared. The whispers at the diner grew louder. Some mocked her kindness. Others rolled their eyes. 7 years? You think you're some saint, they joked behind her back. But Eleanor didn't care. She had long since learned that the smallest acts, repeated faithfully, were the loudest prayers. And so she kept walking out that back door, the paper bag warm in her hands, never imagining how much it would one day mean. The diner's back office smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. Behind the desk sat Mr. Vance, the manager, with a thick mustache and hair slicked back with too much gel. He had a smirk that never reached his eyes. Vance noticed everything, and lately, he had noticed Eleanor. Not her tired feet or her aching back, but the way she carried bags after closing. Too often, too quietly. He began making small remarks when no one else was listening. "Funny how food keeps disappearing after shifts," he muttered one night, his gaze narrowing. Eleanor pretended to busy herself stacking plates, but his words clung. The whispers from coworkers didn't help. "Maybe she's stealing pies." One cook chuckled in the kitchen. "Nah," another server said, lowering her voice. "She's feeding that street kid again. I saw her once." The first laughed. "Boss ain't going to like it. If she's caught wasting inventory, that's as good as stealing." Eleanor overheard. Her hands tightened around the coffee pot she was holding, but she stayed silent. Then one Friday evening, the storm broke. The register was short, $40 missing. Vance gathered the staff, pacing in front of them like a wolf ready to strike. His voice was smooth, too smooth. "Someone's been taking money, and I don't need to guess who." Eyes shifted toward Eleanor. She felt her stomach drop. Vance pointed. You've been walking out with bags every night. Everyone's seen it. Don't play innocent." Her chest tightened. Her voice shook as she tried to explain. "That's food, not money. I've never touched the till." But Vance cut her off with a sneer. "You think the owner cares about your sob story? You're done here." Silence filled the diner. A silence more painful than words. A young busboy whispered to another near the doorway, "She's been here longer than all of us. They can't just throw her out like that." The other shrugged. "They just did." Vance always wanted her gone. Eleanor stood frozen, the room spinning. She wanted to shout, to fight back, to demand proof. But years of being quiet, years of swallowing her pride, chained her tongue. And so she walked. That night, her steps down the alley were heavier than ever. Leo was waiting, shoulders hunched against the cold. He looked at her, expecting a familiar bag. Her hands trembled as she passed it to him. Inside was more than food. She had tucked a folded napkin. Ink smudged where her tears had touched it. "I no longer work here. They said things I didn't do, but if you ever need help, this is where I live." She added her address, her handwriting shaky. The boy took the bag, staring at her longer than usual, his lips parted as if he might speak, but nothing came out. He simply nodded, clutching the bag to his chest, and disappeared into the night. Eleanor stood in the alley long after he was gone, a cold cutting through her coat, her body hollow. She had nothing left now. No job, no security, no certainty. Only the faint hope that the boy would one day remember the address. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, no one ever came knocking. And Eleanor learned the cruelest part of kindness. Sometimes you give everything, and it vanishes into silence. Winters went first, the kind that bite through wool and fine bone. Eleanor learned to layer 2 socks, cardigan undercoat, and a scarf tucked to keep the wind from slipping down her collar. Mornings smelled like menthol and bleach. She took part-time cleaning jobs, scrubbing other people's lives to pay for her own. She'd kneel to wipe baseboards, her palms aching, and flex her hands till the ache dulled, then keep going. Her house stayed small and tidy, a faded blue with a porch that creaked like an old friend. On the fridge, crooked under a magnet shaped like a pie, sat a folded napkin with an address written in her own slanted hand. She didn't need the reminder. She kept it anyway, a promise to herself that if a knock ever came, she'd hear it. Neighbors rotated like seasons. New faces, new cars, new noise. Some mornings on the sidewalk, 2 teens in hoodies would lean against a fence, trading whispers. "Yo, that's Miss Eleanor," one said once, chin tipping toward her. Old lady with a tote bag. She used to feed a kid behind the diner every day. Wild, right?
Nah.
People forget. Bet the kid did too. Their voices faded as she passed. She lifted a hand, kept walking. She kept noticing small things, a stray cat that wouldn't be touched, the way the bus driver hummed off-key, a newspaper headline about a young founder raising millions. Names and numbers that slid past like rain on glass. She didn't read business pages. Coupons were more useful. At night, she brewed weak tea, listened to the radiator hiss, and watched headlights wash the ceiling in soft, moving squares. On Sundays, she volunteered at a church pantry, stacking cans into tidy pyramids. The pastor's wife tried to press money into her palm more than once. Eleanor would smile, close the fingers back around the bills, and nod toward a mother juggling twins. Her week looks heavier than mine. Then she'd straighten labels, line edges, and breathe when the door finally shut. Every winter, she knit one scarf. Same pattern, slow and steady, like counting days. She stored them in a drawer she never opened. Spring always came, but she knitted anyway. Habit can be a kind of prayer. Some months were thin. The electric bill hummed like a low worry in the back of her head. She took an extra shift, wiping down a barbershop after hours. The owner whistled, handed her a bottle of soda. "What's up, E? You good?" "I'm all right," she'd say, rubbing a circle until the glass shone. "I'm here." Gossip traveled farther than truth. At the corner store, two women by the lotto stand traded soft commentary behind cupped hands. "She's still alone." Heard she lost that diner job over something messy." Sad. A pause. "Some folks give till there's nothing left." "Then what?" Eleanor pretended to study tomatoes, testing for ripeness with a thumb, pretending the whispers didn't land. They did. She just knew how to carry weight quietly. Years slipped by the way sunsets do, slow if you watch them, gone if you blink. Leo's face blurred at the edges, but his eyes stayed clear in her memory, steady and bright. Sometimes when a lanky teenager crossed the street and held a door for her, a warmth would lift in her chest, almost a laugh. "Look at you. Look how you survived." Then the door closed. The day moved on. On a humid July night, sleep wouldn't come. The air was thick. The fan ticked with a tiny wobble. Eleanor sat at the edge of her bed, pressed her knuckles, and listened to the neighborhood breathe. Music from 3 houses down, a couple arguing, a siren long away. She stood, padded to the kitchen, poured water, and leaned on the counter. The laminate was cool against her forearms. Her breath slowed. Autumn again. Leaves turned like pages and fell. She raked small piles, tied them into bags, and paused to stretch the tight line of her back. Across the street, a new couple moved in, hauling plants and art and a bicycle with one squeaky wheel. The guy lifted a hand. "Morning." "Morning," she answered, a small smile lifting one corner of her mouth. That week, the barber mentioned a crazy story about a tech guy who grew up rough and now built schools. Names bounced around the shop like ping-pong balls, fast, excited. Eleanor wiped mirrors, half listening, letting the words pass. Schools. Kids. Good. She tucked the thought away with the rest. Then the air thinned. A first frost silvered the grass. She pulled her coat tighter, buttoned by careful button. That afternoon, clouds hung low. The sky was a dull pewter lid. She brewed tea, set the mug on the sill, and drew the curtain just enough to watch the street. A delivery van rumbled by, tires whispering over damp asphalt. Farther down, a sedan idled, then eased away. Normal traffic, nothing more. She rolled the last bit of yarn from this year's scarf, measured the tail with her fingers, and closed the stitch. The room fell full of soft, small sounds, the clock tick, the fan's faint hum, the cup settling with a ceramic tap as she placed it down. She exhaled long and low. Late afternoon tilted toward blue. Gravel crackled somewhere close. A sound more grounded than the regular rush. A heavier engine, steady, unhurried. She didn't move at first. Engines were part of the soundtrack of her block. Still, her hand drifted to the curtain. She pinched the fabric just enough to lift. Headlights slid across the porch rail, strong and clean. A dark SUV eased into view and rolled to a stop by the curb, the hood reflecting the frail sky. The motor idled low, and even like a held breath. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the curtain's edge. She felt her pulse in her wrist, countable, calm, not startled, simply present. She set the scarf on the table, smoothed it once with the flats of her palms, and stood. The radiator clicked, then went still. Outside, the SUV's engine kept its patient murmur. She inhaled steady and slow and stepped toward the door. The doorknob felt cool against her palm. Eleanor's breath missed a beat as she opened it. The chill of late autumn slid across her skin. The SUV's engine cut off, and silence swelled, broken only by the crunch of shoes on gravel. A man stepped out. Tall, sharp suit, the kind you only saw in magazines left on barbershop counters. The door shut with a smooth, expensive thud. He stood still for a moment, scanning the house like he was memorizing it, his eyes steady, deep, and unmistakably familiar. Finally, they locked onto hers. Eleanor gripped the frame, her knees softening. "Where do I know those eyes?" He walked closer, not rushed, not hesitant, but measured, like someone carrying years of weight. When he reached the porch, he stopped a respectful distance away. Then his voice came, low, warm, layered with something she hadn't heard in a decade. "You don't remember me, do you?" Eleanor blinked, her lips parting. The silver of his watch caught the fading sun. She shook her head softly. I can't place you." He smiled, and for a fleeting second, she saw him. Not the man, but the boy. The same wide eyes she'd watched grow hungrier each year, the same quiet nods at the alley's edge. "I'm the kid from behind the diner," he said. "The one you fed every day, for 7 years." The world tilted. Eleanor steadied herself on the frame. Her breath caught in her chest. The alley. The paper bags. The napkins. The last note with her address. The boy. Her eyes watered, the memory flooding back in detail, so sharp it hurt. "Oh my God," she whispered. He nodded, his gaze soft. "That note you gave me, I kept it. I didn't show up then. I couldn't. I was barely surviving. But I swore if I ever made it out, I'd find you." Her throat burned with tears she hadn't let out in years. She gestured weakly toward the door. Come in, please." Inside, the house felt smaller with him in it, his presence filling the air. He looked around at the worn furniture, the stack of unpaid bills tucked neatly on the side table. He noticed everything but didn't comment. Instead, he turned to her. "I made it through," he said quietly. "Tech, coding, hustling, sleepless nights. And somehow it worked. I built something. People know my name now. But none of it would have happened if you hadn't kept me alive. You never once looked at me like I was trash. You didn't care about my skin color. You just saw a kid. And that saved me." Eleanor's hands shook as she covered her mouth. She whispered, "All I ever wanted was for you to eat. To be okay." He exhaled steady. "You did more than that. You gave me dignity when the world took it away." The next weeks passed like scenes from a dream. He set up a new home for her, warm, light-filled, no peeling paint, no creaking porch. He launched a business in her name, one that would keep her stable for life. But the biggest shock came when he unveiled something larger. He founded an orphanage, brick by brick, built in her honor. Above the door, etched in clean stone, were the words, "The Hayes Home for Children." Reporters swarmed the opening, cameras flashing as he stood at the podium. Eleanor, in a simple navy dress, sat in the front row, hands folded tight in her lap. Her eyes brimmed when he gestured toward her. "If not for her," he said, his voice strong enough to quiet the crowd, "I wouldn't be here today. She fed me when the world wouldn't. She believed I mattered when no one else did. She didn't look at my skin. She didn't ask questions. She just cared. And that gave me the strength to survive." Gasps rippled through the audience. Heads turned toward Eleanor, some clapping, others wiping their eyes. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. Her hands trembled, but this time not from exhaustion, from something heavier, richer, being seen. When the conference ended, children from the orphanage, bright-eyed, loud, alive, ran to her, hugging her legs, tugging her sleeves. She laughed, the sound surprising even herself. For the first time in years, Eleanor's heart felt full. Not from money, not from recognition, but from the quiet truth that what she gave in silence had come back in ways she never dreamed possible. And so the scraps of food she carried in paper bags became something greater than survival. They became seeds. Seeds that grew into a man, a legacy, and a home for countless others. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses outlive the darkest years. Because when Eleanor fed a forgotten boy, she wasn't just feeding hunger, she was feeding hope.